Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Greg Slozik, and I'm completing my final module for EDL 850. And today we're going to be looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we're going to be talking about how best to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion within our international learning community. So, some definition of terms. As we know, right now there are some hot button issues with regard to equal access for all students, no matter if they are male, female, or if they are a transgender, or if they are transitioning. And so it's really important for educators in public schools in America or internationally to be educated, be open-minded, and to know the rights of the students. And so some definition of terms. Transgender refers to individuals who are people who don't identify with the sex they were assigned at birth and instead choose to express a different gender identity. Gender identity, whilst is defined as while sex is assigned at birth is binary, one's gender identity is informed by how one sees oneself. Queer, once carrying a negative connotation, numerous LGBT youth have reappropriated this word to refer to the LGBT community as a whole. And for us as educators, pretty important to understand coming out and disclosure. This is when an LGBTQ individual discloses their sexual orientation and gender identity to their family, friends, and community, also known as coming out. This is something obviously that we could experience, and I actually have experienced on a first-hand basis in an international setting a couple times, and I'll actually allude to that when we go from the U.S. to specific places within the larger global context. It's important to note that although some students may wish to come out, that they have the right legally in the United States to not come out, and they have the right to privacy, and we'll talk a little bit about some of their constitutional rights as we move on. So, rights. LGBT rights, they are protected from harassment like every other student. They're protected under Title IX. They have the right to privacy, so the school cannot legally publish gender without consent, and they get to choose which gender they want to be. Speech, again, they have the same constitutional rights as every other citizen within the normal constitutional bounds. Gender expression, okay, again, this is protected in all 50 states. Any school that has co-curricular programs must provide access for gay, straight alliance clubs. And every student must have equal access to all school events, including things like sports, prom, anything that would be granted to any other student. So, what are the U.S. Department of Education guidelines? Well, Title IX applies to any school in the U.S. receiving federal funding, and so some specific guidance that have been put out by the U.S. Department of Education recently deals, again, with some hot button issues that have been in the news in the past 5-6 years, particularly restrooms and locker rooms. They're chosen by the individual and not assigned. So if someone is transitioning, if they have already chosen a gender, they get to choose which facilities that they feel comfortable with. Names and pronouns and records the student chooses, and again, going back to the right to privacy, they choose how and when they are to be published. Any school that receives federal funding and has a dress code, those schools with dress codes cannot assign gender-specific clothing. So again, this student has choice. Specifically, student or public educational institutions, and those again receiving funding from the federal government, must have insurance which covers all, and so there can't be discriminatory practice within any of the insurance companies that cover students. And every school that again accepts funding has an obligation to enforce students' rights. So, what are the biggest challenges?
The Trump administration is sparking backlash for its policies impacting the transgender community. On Thursday, the Justice Department filed a brief to the Supreme Court arguing federal law does not protect transgender workers from certain types of discrimination. A CBSN Originals documentary released last year explored the definitions and vocabulary in the transgender community. Christina Capititis produced that documentary titled Gender, the Space Between, and she joins us now to discuss the latest news on this topic. Christina, so great to have you here. Yesterday, the Department of Justice issued some news regarding transgender people that has the entire LGBTQ community concerned. Can you tell us about that?
Right. Yesterday, the Department of Justice sent a memo to the Supreme Court basically stating that Title VII, which is a civil rights law protecting against discrimination on the basis of sex, does not extend to transgender workers.
And this came up in an actual case, correct? Someone was fired who came out as transgender?
Right. The filing comes as the Supreme Court is weighing whether or not to consider the case of a Detroit funeral home, which fired a worker for after she came out as transgender. And a lower court already decided that that was discrimination on the basis of sex. They said that inherently, firing an employee on the basis of being transgender necessarily is firing an employee on the basis of sex. But the Detroit funeral home has appealed that, and now it may go to the Supreme Court, and the Department of Justice is complicating matters.
And so the Supreme Court may ultimately have to decide what is gender exactly, correct?
Right.
This is so interesting.
Okay, so I think that video kind of encapsulates really some of the very difficult political issues that are happening in the United States right now, in particular as we speak, or as I speak, pardon me. The legislature is, getting ready to field a nominee to fill a judicial seat on the Supreme Court, and so it may be that a very, very conservative Supreme Court is going to be in the near future presiding over some of these cases. And so, again, some of the biggest challenges may come at the federal level, which would be a bit of a reversal from about the 1960s with the Warren Court onward, with regard to a more liberal, proactive judiciary at the federal level. And so that could be one of the biggest challenges. Another challenge, again, could be educating staff and keeping staff focused on ensuring that they understand the legal obligation that the school has, as well as their pastoral obligation to these children. And so, again, I think, you could look at this from a macro view within national politics and within Supreme Court jurisprudence, and you could also look at it pragmatically on the ground level. So it's a very, very difficult time to see how at both levels these types of things are going to play out for the LGBTQ community. So when looking at this from the perspective of an international school, I just took directly from the rules for IB World Schools right in the very beginning. In the preamble, it states 5.8. It is the practice of IB to make its programs available to all students enrolled at IB World Schools. No student will be excluded by the IB on the grounds of race, nationality, or national origin, ethnicity, culture, gender, age, sexual orientation, religious affiliation, political beliefs, disability, or any other personal characteristics as prohibited by law. Schools must implement their duties under these rules in a manner that enables this practice to be upheld. And so that seems, when you read it, to be very encompassing and wide sweeping. But in actuality, when looking at this, it really depends on the location in the world that the school is operating. And so I'll give two real-time examples in my 15-year international career where there had been a real differing interpretation of the law. So two pictures here. One is a very conservative picture of Muslim girls. I use this picture just to represent my time in Dubai. I was in Dubai at Gems World Academy for 3 years, and I served as the department head for secondary social studies, individuals and societies. And so when I was there, it was illegal. You couldn't be gay. It was against the law. And so in a very conservative country, very religious country, these types of things, obviously the rules of the IB were couldn't trump, obviously, national sentiment and national law. And so again, it was very different from, for example, my first international experience was teaching, and I was a junior administrator in Bangkok, and then later in Chiang Mai in Thailand. Totally different. As a matter of fact, in Thailand, there's a third gender called Gatoi. And at my first school, when I was secondary principal at Siam International School, we had two children who actually were going through gender reassignment to be Gatoi. And strangely enough, like the people who needed the most training were actually the teachers. We had quite a few older teachers who were from Europe and the UK, and they just, I mean, I don't think that they were mean spirited and malicious. They just didn't really understand it, and so we actually had to do some professional development to get them to understand exactly how to address these students and how best to ensure that they felt safe and comfortable. And again, radically different interpretation of the rules. And this is one of the challenges when you are working in an international environment. You do really need to understand local custom, and you need to understand how you, as an advocate for student well-being and safety, what are the ways in which that you can do that, and what are the ways in which you're kind of hindered by local law. And those are my references, and thank you very much.